As a millennial myself, I remember the first time being exposed to pornography, like so many people are, when they're in their kind of young, kind of either late elementary or middle school years. And I remember the shock and awe that occurred on that day with a friend. Nevertheless, that was on a desktop computer, probably on, corded into the internet, and that has changed so much now, and it's had me very concerned as a doctor and as a clinician with especially the Generation Z, and this population of people who have grown up using mobile phones and having therefore kind of unlimited access to pornography on their phones in privacy. It is creating all sorts of problems that I'm seeing clinically. It's creating all sorts of paraphilias or abnormal sexual desires that are creating a lot of problematic behaviors in people. So it's something that I really wanted to talk about, and I'm so passionate about recovering from porn use, problematic porn use or porn addiction, and wanting to support people in that. So that's what this project today is all about. This is in partnership with BlockerX, an app that helps people to stay to stay free from pornography. And again, it's such an important problem out there. And so I want to support anyone that I can in their recovery, and that's what this episode today is all about. So please listen in and hear what porn addiction is all about and what can be done about it so that you can feel better and that you can avoid relapsing on porn and live a clean and free life. Welcome to Brain Health with Dr. Nissen. Today we are talking about what I believe to be one of the most neglected areas of men's mental health and men's mental illness, which is porn addiction or problematic porn use. So today we're going to be talking about that. We'll be talking about this issue. We'll be talking about how big of a problem it is. You're going to learn kind of some background around porn use and how prevalent it is and what are some of the signs of it. And then we're going to talk about porn as a drug of addiction. How does it relate to other drugs that are commonly abused? And by what mechanisms can somebody become addicted? And then we'll talk about the risks of porn use. What are some of the outcomes that can happen, some of the illnesses that can come from this, and then how to know whether or not you have a porn addiction or a loved one might have a porn addiction, and what they should do to get over it. And finally focusing on these tactics that are evidence-based ways of intervening with the porn addiction. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So one way that porn use has been described in a problematic way is as problematic porn use or porn addiction. So for a lot of different mental illnesses, they're described in the DSM. This is the Diagnostic Statistic Manual that's used to define things like major depression or OCD. But actually, if you look in there, you won't find that in the DSM. And in fact, it's been a bit of an area of debate as to whether or not problematic porn use should be its own diagnosis and how it relates to other sort of paraphilias or abnormal sort of sexual desires or sex addictions. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how they're different. So one way this has been named is as problematic porn use, or another way is as porn addiction. Porn addiction is, in my opinion, a very real thing, and it's the cause of many problems in people's life and the cause of many illnesses. For a lot of mental illnesses, the way that they're understood and the way that they're described is by their causing of major life sort of disability or problems in somebody's life. So if you think about major depression, for one instance, it's one thing if you have a sad mood, but it's another thing if you have a sad mood that keeps you from going to work, that keeps you to participating in your relationships. And similarly for addictions, if somebody's using cocaine every day, but they're able to hold their job, they're able to maintain a healthy relationship, they're able to bathe in the morning, feed themselves, then the question of whether or not it's a mental illness is a little more tricky than if they have this dysfunction in their life. So that's one thing to look for with porn addiction. is to say that this is a mental illness if it's causing some sort of disability or some sort of dysfunction in your life, an inability. It's getting in the way of your work. It's getting in the way of your relationships. That's one way to define problematic porn use, and we'll talk later on about how you can determine whether or not you or a loved one has it, or at least get an idea based on some different criteria. An addiction, as a definition, is a strong and harmful need to regularly have something, such as a drug, or do something, such as gamble. So in this instance, for porn addiction, you would have a strong and harmful need to regularly do pornography or masturbation. Regularly view pornography, and then usually masturbate after that. This is a highly prevalent issue across the world. In a survey that was recently done, greater than 90% of American men reported watching porn with some regularity. So, almost every man is affected in America, and probably in most countries that have reliable internet. On Pornhub, which is the world's largest porn website alone, well over 90 billion videos are viewed every single day by more than 64 million visitors, with 26% of them being female, so the vast majority of the viewers being male. And again, just a tremendous amount of content in this area is created and is consumed. So why is this an issue? I think as a lot of people think of porn addiction, they think about, they sort of relate the current sort of porn environment to how it's been in the past. And in reality, this is a totally different thing that we're seeing. In the past, there used to be, sort of these sex shops, and people would go in, and you'd have to get in your car, drive to the car, and then get there and, ask for a magazine, see that and flip from page to page, or whatever you would do. And, it was something that required a lot of effort. It was something that required some sort of social risk, because you're putting yourself out there, you're showing your face to the people that are there, or maybe to your neighbors who are seeing you sort of drive into there. And then the content that you're engaging with is not changing very rapidly. You're, looking at pictures from one to the next, or maybe you're looking at one video, but then you would have to, take out the DVD or whatever sort of physical video and switch it out for another one. So a lot more effort, a lot more social risk was involved. So those are some barriers that kept this from becoming such an issue. But we have nowadays, with the smartphones, we have accessibility to pornography like tap water, in a way that is truly unprecedented, and that is truly going to create different issues for people across the world, and in particular for kids. Because one way to think of what differentiates a young person's brain from an older person's brain is the level of plasticity. This is how easily we make new connections, form new connections between different brain regions. And in a developing brain, nobody has ever known what it would do to have a developing brain be exposed to this sort of content, and grow up with it. And only now are we having some millennials who have, over the majority of their lives, been exposed to internet and therefore been exposed to pornography. Are we beginning to see some of the outcomes of that? And it's really looking very problematic, as far as I can tell. So again, the porn addiction that we see nowadays is an unprecedented issue, because of this new reality of internet and smartphones. And now that we're having all of these young people who are being exposed to pornography from an early age, we're going to be seeing some different outcomes in their brains and in their sexual functioning that I think will be unprecedented, just like how the access to it itself is unprecedented. So how does porn act like a drug? Porn is just like a lot of other drugs of addiction, and in particular, one of the main roles, one of the main neurotransmitter sort of activities of pornography is, just like you might have guessed it, dopamine. So a lot of people describe dopamine as the go-get-it neurotransmitter. A lot of people kind of erroneously describe it as the pleasure neurotransmitter, and that's not quite true because dopamine's a lot more about the chase. So I think actually sex is a really good way to explain different neurotransmitters, and so dopamine is like foreplay. It's the excitement, but it's not the full culmination. It's not the it's not the orgasm. Dopamine is not the pleasure neurotransmitter. It's the go get it. It's the foreplay. It's the excitement, and that's a lot of what's happening at the beginning of porn consumption. So you get sort of an interesting and sort of exciting idea in your mind. You go to chase after it. You're clicking from one link to the next, and you're getting sort of this excitement that's building. And as part of that, dopamine is a stimulating neurotransmitter. A lot of stimulant drugs increase dopamine, so things like cocaine, methamphetamines, or crack cocaine. These are things that stimulate you, and so you get sort of this excitement as you're sort of beginning to go down this rabbit hole of a porn binge. So in that way, it's similar. The start of porn use is similar to using something like cocaine or meth or something like that. You sort of feel excited and curious and kind of a little bit powerful as well as you're consuming this, the sexual content, and you're kind of seeing the excitement of one image or one video to the next. And then, like I was saying, just like with sex, dopamine is the foreplay, and the ejaculation or the orgasm that happens is actually a big part of that is your endorphins. So people talk about endorphins as the runner's high. This is like the sort of like peaceful, sort of release that happens after a good exercise or after orgasm, and that I would say is probably more of the pleasure neurotransmitter, which is your endorphins, which are your body's own opioids. So if you think of somebody that's using heroin or fentanyl, the sensation that they get is like an orgasm. It's a sensation of sort of profound sort of pleasure and rest, and sort of all other sort of problems and things go away just for a little bit. So that's kind of how those relate. And then, normally this endorphin and sort of pleasure after ejaculation is quickly followed by a lot of regret for people. So that's sort of some ways that dopamine's involved. So one thing that you can think about porn, or one way that you can think about porn as a drug of addiction, is to think about it through the lens of operant conditioning. So as you may have heard of Pavlov's dogs, what he did was Pavlov was this experimenter who was looking at dogs' reactions to food or meat, and so he would see that they would salivate at seeing food, and then shortly he would ring a bell along with giving the food, and then he would just ring the bell alone and see that the dogs would salivate just to the bell alone. So this is showing that while a bell isn't supposed to make anyone salivate, you can learn to salivate to something that isn't your initial sort of stimulus, and that it's something that comes before your stimulus. So in this gets to the point of sort of rewards and punishments, and how people and animals learn. One way that we learn is through rewards and punishments. So there are a few different ways that this can happen. We can get a positive reinforcement, so that's a positive reward. So that would be like if you have a mouse in a cage with a lever that it presses on to get food or something like that. A positive reinforcement would be that the mouse pulls on the lever and it gets food. It's getting rewarded for what it did. So it's getting positively reinforced. Having negative reinforcement, this would be that you're taking away something bad in a way to encourage somebody to do what you want. So this would be like the mouse is in a cage that's constantly shocking them, and they pull on the lever and it stops shocking them. So this would be, again, negative reinforcement. The mouse would learn to pull on the lever in order for their suffering to go away momentarily. And then you have punishments. So positive punishments would be when you give something bad to somebody if they do what you don't want for them to do. So positive punishment would be that the mouse pulls on the lever and it shocks them. So then it will learn to not pull the lever again. And then you have negative punishment. This would be when you would take away something good in order to punish somebody. So, the mouse is there eating its food and it happens to pull the lever and you would take away its food. It would learn not to pull the lever. So these are some different ways that humans and other animals learn. And so something to think about with porn is that porn can act just like one of these reinforcers. In fact, for humans and for a lot of animals, sex is one of the most important rewards that we can get to drive our behaviors. Just like food and safety, if you were to use porn, think of it as just like you're rewarding yourself with food, or like you're giving yourself a big, stack of cash as a payday. So each time that you're using porn, you are rewarding yourself for that behavior. And that's what's so dangerous about this. When you are using porn, you are teaching yourself over and over that this is good, that it's something that you want to keep doing, because each time that you orgasm, your body is learning, this is great, what I just did. So what's really dangerous and what's really important to think about, and I'll get to this a little bit later on, is thinking about what was it that you just watched, and how dangerous is it that you are rewarding yourself for watching that thing and for being interested in that thing. So this is how some paraphilias, or abnormal sexual desires, develop. For somebody that has pedophilia, they're interested in kids or sexually aroused by kids. For somebody that has that practices bestiality, so having sex with animals. What can happen is, and I've seen this clinically, I've had patients, for instance, who have developed a paraphilia where they would get aroused with the idea of murder, and so they would get sexually aroused or turned on by the idea of murder. And so what happens is, if you are viewing content, at first maybe it's just a standard sort of sex scene, but then the second sex scene, maybe the person's like, being hit violently, but not so violently, but you masturbate to that, and you teach yourself that, you condition yourself, reward yourself for watching that. Then for the next video, it's a little bit more violent, and actually the person gets hurt and bleeds or something like that, and you masturbate and have that reward to yourself after watching that. You are rewarding yourself for watching increasingly more and more dangerous content, and you're developing some more and more sort of abnormal desires. So think about yourself from the operant conditioning perspective of that. Every time that I masturbate, I'm rewarding myself for doing this activity. Is this something that I want to keep rewarding, something that I want to keep teaching myself to do? Or is this something that is dangerous to reward yourself for doing? Just like how you wouldn't want to teach a random person on the street, you wouldn't want to give them a stack of $100 bills for each time that they punched or stabbed someone on the street, because then they would start doing that a lot to get that money. You similarly don't want to reward yourself for doing something that's dangerous. So that is one way to think about porn, and one way of why it's addicting is that you are reinforcing, you are teaching for yourself every single time that you orgasm, you are teaching yourself to continue doing that activity. So this brings me to my next point, is that porn is a lot like other drugs because it causes increased tolerance. So tolerance means that you need more, and you need more novelty in order to continue to get stimulated and continue to have a pleasurable experience. So there's this one study that was looking at, let me see, it was in Behavior Research and Therapy 2000, the year 2000, I believe. And it was looking at how turned on do people get from viewing the same pornography over and over and over. So what they did was they took males and they put a measure on their penis to look at the circumference of the penis, basically to see how often do these people get an erection to this film that they would watch. So then they would, have them watch the film and see how often they would get an erection. And sure enough, as they watched the film over and over and over, the regularity of the erections went down and down and down. So what does this mean? If you watch the same porn over and over and over, you won't get turned on from it. In order to get aroused again, you would need to see something new. So there needs to be some sort of novelty in order to have the arousal happen. So what this showed is that, by around the 18th time viewing the same porn video, the person would have almost no sexual arousal to it. But then when they would introduce there's a new video that they would show at around the 18th time, then there would be a huge spike in the erections. This means that, as you get exposed to the novel or new content, this makes you aroused again. So what is this showing? This is showing that this is the danger of pornography, is that you, after a while, you need to be exposed to novel and new things in order to continue to be aroused. And this is where it can get very dangerous with pornography, just like I was mentioning before with paraphilias, that if you start with, standard intercourse, and then you move on to a video that's a little bit more either violent or with a population that's a little bit more borderline in its demographics, you can go very dangerously down one rabbit hole to where you need to keep looking for more and more dangerous, more and more new things. And again, that's how those paraphilias develop, and how you can have people that are sexually aroused from pedophilia, or being aroused by animals and practicing things like bestiality. You have to, these are in a lot of times cases where people have sought more and more and more sort of novel things in order to maintain themselves to be aroused. So another way that addiction, that porn addiction is similar to drug addictions, is that it causes triggers. So this is something that we see in substance uses all the time. You see somebody who has alcohol use disorder, and so they drink more alcohol and they wish they did. It causes a lot of problems in their lives. And what do they get? They get triggers. So this might be the sound of ice hitting a cup. It might be the idea of going to a tailgate, seeing people playing drinking games. It might be the idea of a trigger could be like a certain song that they use, or an artist that they would listen to when they would drink. These sorts of things that suddenly when you listen to it, or you hear it, or you come across that trigger, you suddenly just want to, or you need to have a drink. And the same thing happens in pornography use, that some of the triggers that you can get can be things like social media. So maybe some person who you follow, that when you come across a new thing posted by their profile, that you become triggered again into wanting to masturbate, or view pornography and then masturbate. You could have certain environments, so like going into your dark bedroom when you're all alone, nobody's home, something like that could be a trigger. So this is just like the triggers that we see in substance use disorders. And then additionally, another way that porn is like other drugs and its addictiveness is that it can strengthen the reptilian brain and weaken the prefrontal control. This is causing poor impulse control in the person. So think about your brain as multiple layers. The deepest part of your brain, just like if you were to take your thumb and have your hand fold over it like this. This is how our brain is wired, or this is how our brain is really created. Deep inside, there's this reptilian brain, which is very similar to what you would see, in reptiles or in other animals like dogs or cats. It's something that it's the part of us that responds to fears, instincts to feed ourselves, instincts to have sex, instincts to conserve our energy. It's hidden deep inside, and it's covered by the parts of our brain that largely make us human. In particular, the frontal cortex and the prefrontal cortex. That a large part of the prefrontal cortex is the role in inhibition, so inhibiting our animalistic drives. So if we want to punch somebody, acting out violently like an animal, the prefrontal part controls the animalistic or the reptilian brain underneath and says, no, it wouldn't be smart to do that because I would get fired and I need to keep my job, right? And so this is the role of the prefrontal cortex, is this inhibitory role. And so what can happen in addiction, or in fact what does happen in addiction, is that the reptilian brain becomes too small, and we practice over and over and over the decreased ability of our prefrontal cortex to control our reptilian brain, right? And so what you see then is poor impulse control, because you've practiced over and over and over that as your brain tells you, no, you shouldn't do this, well, screw it. You've practiced over and over and over that prefrontal control over the reptilian brain is weakened over and over, that no matter what you say to yourself, you're not able to control those sort of reptilian urges. And so this is what happens in all forms of addiction, and what happens in pornography is that as you practice over and over of sort of saying to your prefrontal cortex that's saying you shouldn't do this, and you say, well, screw it, then you get worse and worse at that, not only in your control over porn, but in all areas of your life, where you may find that you're sort of less scrupulous in your finances, or you may find that you're less able to sort of focus yourself on your studies, and that you are having more sort of ADHD-like symptoms of getting distracted by a lot of different things. So these are some ways that the brain function and the circuitry between different areas of the brain become affected in porn addiction, just like they do in other substance use. And then additionally, what can be seen is that there's dysfunctional stress relief, or dysfunctional emotional control using something as a substance as opposed to good mental health practices. So just like we see in substance addictions, so alcohol, again, another good example. Commonly for people, they use it as an anxiety treatment. There's somebody that may have social anxiety. They feel nervous in social environments, and so they start drinking and realize, hey, my social anxiety goes away when I drink. And so then they learn over and over that, every time that I go out or I'm going to a party, I need to take a few drinks beforehand. You're self-medicating your anxiety, in that social anxiety, and usually that then we fall into the problem of, for all sorts of anxiety, to then have a reliance on alcohol to treat the anxiety. You may take a few drinks before an important presentation at work. You may then take a few drinks before a difficult day at work. And then you may find all days being anxiety provoking and you need to drink every single day. That's the same thing that happens in porn use, and that can happen in porn use, is that a very common thing would be for the feelings of loneliness or of depression to be a trigger for somebody to use porn. For a very brief while while they're using the porn, they don't feel lonely, and in fact they don't feel pressed. They feel powerful, they feel curious, they feel excited, they feel desired, maybe even by somebody on the other side of the screen. And that's something that can become very dysfunctional as you start to rely on that over and over and over. So another way that it's very similar. And then, this leads to this whole process, kind of like I just laid out, that is similar for porn as it is for a lot of other substance use, a lot of other addictions, which is having a trigger, having that lead you to be excited, and then having your prefrontal cortex trying to tell you, no, you shouldn't do this. We learned about this in the past. You can't do this. And then you ignoring that, and then having the climax, and then feeling this feeling of regret afterwards. It's the exact same thing that happens when somebody relapses on alcohol, or when they relapse on heroin. So now that we understand how it can cause an addiction, porn can cause an addiction, and how that addiction can relate to a lot of other substances that people can have addictions to, let's talk about some of the risks of porn use. So the number one risk, and the most common thing that people come to the clinic with, would be erectile dysfunction. So it is hugely common in anyone that I come across that is experiencing erectile dysfunction. So they're having difficulties getting an erection, or somebody that has difficulties achieving orgasm. So they're having sex and they can't they can't have an orgasm, they can't ejaculate, or in somebody who is sort of just taking too long, or actually another common thing is that somebody ejaculates too early or having premature ejaculation. All of these can be related to porn use. So the erectile dysfunction and the delayed ejaculation, a lot of it is related psychologically to this novelty seeking and to the sort of alien-like feel that people can have when they're with a real person. If they become so accustomed to masturbating and ejaculating after masturbating, then it can feel very alien to actually be doing intercourse with another human being. It's so different than the context from which they normally ejaculate. So that can be a source of problems for them. But additionally, based on the content that you're viewing, it can be so abnormal and so unrealistic that you suddenly have labeled in your mind a sort of environment as being sexually arousing for you that you can't find in real life. And so when you're having a normal sexual encounter with somebody in real life, it's something that is so ho-hum or so unexciting for you based on what you've seen, that it can be difficult for you to get aroused. So that's one of the ways that erectile dysfunction happens. You've sort of taught yourself through operant conditioning that you will be rewarded over and over for something that's either more and more violent or something that is with a person that looks a certain way that maybe they don't look like, that very few people look like in real life, that you have a difficult time then becoming sexually aroused by somebody that is more commonly, looks a more common way, or that, is interacting with you in a way that's less violent. Similarly, so that's covering erectile dysfunction, but for premature ejaculation, again, another issue. It's not a lot of people who masturbate often. They may be in environments where they feel nervous or are overly excited, or they're trying to cover it up, and so they've taught themselves over and over to ejaculate very quickly. And so then you can then teach yourself to have premature ejaculation, where if you've learned through pornography and masturbation to ejaculate within 30 seconds, then that becomes a very big issue in your own, personal, real life sexual encounters. Similarly, one thing I want to touch upon with that erectile dysfunction is that as somebody is, getting exposed to kind of more and more violent content, and this is something that we see a lot in young kids, is that, they'll get in trouble then for either grabbing onto somebody violently, hitting somebody violently in sex, just like they've seen in porn, and then, this is sexual assault or some sort of, there could be some sort of alleged rape or something like that, because they're acting in a way that they've learned through, these learned mechanisms in these videos. So that's touching on erectile dysfunction and some of the risks of acting out too aggressively or in an abnormal way during sex. Another one that's closely related is relationship strife, humiliation, and isolation. So it's very common for people to come into the clinic looking for help with their porn use because somebody, their spouse is close to divorcing them, or because they are feeling more and more isolated. They're feeling like they can't date anyone because every time that they have a sexual encounter, they're either too violent and the person gets scared and leaves, or they have premature ejaculation, or they have erectile dysfunction or delayed ejaculation. So all of these can be really big problems that then lead somebody to come in. But then another very common thing that I touched upon, and probably one of the other most common risks of porn use, is paraphilia. It's developing something like bestiality, so being sexually attracted to animals or acting out in that way, which again is actually not so uncommon. Something like having sort of a sexual desire related to hurting someone or even murdering people is a sort of paraphilia, and pedophilia again is very common. And so as you're looking at pornography, and you need to be exposed to more and more novel so more and more sort of new, exciting content, then it's going to lead you down a rabbit hole that is more and more strange and dangerous. It may lead you to have one of these strange sexual attractions that you would want to avoid. And then finally, some of the other mental illnesses that are associated with porn addiction would be depression and ADHD. So, one of the most common things that people with depression feel is feelings of worthlessness, which is, common in depression, feelings of depression and maybe at some points like wishing that they were dead or that they would be better off not living. So some people can develop mood disorders or depression based on these issues that they're experiencing. And ADHD, like I described, for people who have really lost control of their prefrontal cortex over their animalistic, reptilian sort of lower brain structures, that they can develop inattentiveness and impulsivity and other parts of their life that can, be just like ADHD, or they can really be true ADHD. So how can one know if they have a porn addiction? So, some common signs of addiction to any substance or any behavior is that you have cravings or triggers, kind of like I described before. So where you would, in a day, something not, a regular day, have something not feeling quite right. And so then you would go and seek out, porn, or that you would get triggered by seeing something on TV and go and need to run and into a room or whatever and watch pornography and masturbate. So having cravings or triggers, having an increased tolerance for the substance or for the behavior, so needing to consume more of it or stranger or different amounts or types of it in order to get the same high. That happens with drugs and that happens with porn. And then having feelings of withdrawal when not using. So this is kind of what somebody could feel with the crash or the regret after porn use. And similarly, with the, just going a longer period without it, kind of feeling more depressed or low energy and feeling like you need it as an emotional pick-me-up. So kind of in more concrete terms, some ways to know whether or not you have a porn addiction would be if you are experiencing a significant number of these symptoms that I'll list here. So feeling that you're limiting social, occupational, or recreational activities in order to keep time for finding and viewing pornography. Feeling that viewing pornography takes significant time away from obligations like your work, your academic life, your domestic life, or social life. Feeling that you're continuing your behaviors despite negative consequences. Having tolerance, so needing more frequent or intense pornography needed over time to obtain really an erection and an orgasm. Feeling distress, restlessness, or irritability if you're unable to view pornography. So things like dizziness, headaches, sleeplessness, restlessness, anxiety, depression, mood swings, kind of consuming more extensive or longer periods of pornography than intended, having ongoing but unsuccessful efforts to stop, reduce, or control your behaviors, spending an inordinate amount of time or money viewing pornography. So these are, some symptoms. If you have, say, 3 or more of those, then I think it's very, likely that you're developing some sort of pornography addiction or something close to it. So something to think about is, well, all right, you're thinking maybe I do have a porn addiction, and how do I know if this is bad, if I need to do something about it? So you can think about yourself kind of on a spectrum. One way would be, do you consume this no more than 1 to 2 times a year with no compulsivity, no binging, no changes in self-construction, no changes in kind of how you view yourself, then you're pretty low risk. But if you're, a little bit higher risk is if you're, between curiosity and compulsive behavior, you're consuming it maybe roughly once a month, usually can overcome temptations, but occasionally fall into temptations. You feel horrible afterwards. You may binge for 1 to 2 days, and spend some time fantasizing when not using it, then this is getting a bit more serious. And then more serious still would be if you have sort of chronic struggle, you have loss of hope, that you can only be sober for a few days at a time, you feel hopeless about recovery due to many failed attempts to quit, and then at your worst would be when you're viewing porn and acting out sexually as a daily occurrence. You're experiencing hopelessness about it. Most of the day revolves around seeking and using porn, and you're using more and more abnormal and extreme materials. So, look at yourself on the spectrum and say, how severe is this? And regardless if you think you kind of screened into having 3 or more of those symptoms above, you'll want to seek help for this issue. You'll want to talk to your doctor. Certainly, if you're feeling unsafe, if you're feeling like suicidal related to this, and you want to talk to your doctor, call 911 or go to the ED. But consider how serious this is, and if it's something that's looking more and more serious, then you probably do need professional help with it. So another way to think about this is think, what stage of change are you at? So in addictions, there are these different stages of change, so that you can know kind of where you're at in your changing of your behaviors. So this is a pre-contemplative stage. This is when you are not thinking at all about changing your behaviors. So you're using porn, and if you're pre-contemplative, then you're not really thinking about making any changes. If you're contemplative, that means that you've recognized you had an issue, and you're thinking about making changes. So you're contemplating changes when you're contemplative. Preparation would mean that when you recognize you have an issue and you're making preparations to make changes. So again, pre-contemplative, you're not contemplating any change. Contemplative, you're contemplating changes, and then preparations, you're making preparations to change. And then there's taking action. This is when you've recognized that you have an issue and you're actively making changes in your life. So this is like you make an appointment with a therapist to talk about this issue, and you're attending appointments, making changes in your lifestyle. And then the next phase would be maintenance. This is when you recognize you have an issue, you've made changes, and you're able to remain sober on your current regimen. So that's like you went and saw a therapist, you made these life changes, and now you've been able to maintain sobriety for a week or a month or a year, and you're doing these things to keep yourself sober from porn. And then another thing would be relapse prevention. So this is when you recognize you have an issue, you've made changes, you remain sober, and you've taken actions to prevent relapse. So relapse prevention would be like switching out your smartphone for a dumb phone, or blocking different sites, things like that. So I want for you to think, what stage do you think that you're in? And first of all, do you think you have a problem? Second of all, how severe do you think your problem is? Third of all, what stage are you in? Are you pre-contemplative? Are you contemplative? Are you in preparation? Are you taking action? Are you in maintenance? Or are you preventing relapse? And if you're pre-contemplative or only contemplative, what's preventing you from getting into the next stage? So this can be a question for you, or it can be a question for a loved one that's dealing with this. But what's keeping you from getting to the next stage? Is it that you're thinking, well, this is the only way I reward myself after doing something good? I don't know how I'd replace it. Or is it that, I've already failed so many times, it's not worth it? What's keeping you from getting to the next stage? So the next then part of this is thinking, how do we stop? So for porn addiction, there are a few different ways that are proven to show that you can get better, and you just need to, learn this and implement it in your life. So there is a cycle, and the best thing that we can do is start by learning that cycle, the cycle of porn addiction, and learning our particular cycle so that we can know how to recover from this. So the cycle is the following. First, you have a vulnerable environment. So this always starts with you being in an environment that you are vulnerable to attack. You're vulnerable to falling into the temptation of watching pornography. So this could be for some people like you're drinking and you always tend to use porn after you drink, or for some people it could be that you're lonely and that you always tend to use porn when you're feeling lonely or when you're in the house alone. For some people, a vulnerable environment could be that you are maybe in a fight with a spouse or somebody like that. Think about things like that. Or another one would be like if you're laying in bed with too much time, or you took a nap in the middle of the day. Those are common ones, that you're sort of laying in there. And that you know from past experience, these are times that you've used porn, and so it's a vulnerable time for you. The next thing is to think about your primary and secondary triggers. So the primary trigger is, this is the thing you see that makes you want to use porn. So it could be something that you see on somebody that you follow on Instagram, and you see their picture, and that tends to lead you to seek out porn. It could be somebody that you see on Netflix or on TV, something you watch on Netflix or TV, and then you go and watch that. So think about social media. Social media is probably the main sources of triggers for people. Think about your Snapchat, your Twitter, your Instagram, your TikTok, seeing certain people on there, and the different triggers that they present to you. Times when you've seen people and you've thought, I wonder, who's this person I keep seeing? Let's see what's out there. Things like that. Secondary triggers would be, these are your learned triggers, the ones just like the bell for Pavlov's dogs. Something that isn't sexual but that you've learned is something that puts you into this sexual sort of rabbit hole. And so that could be something like your dark bedroom. If that's, something, if you always viewed pornography, masturbated in your dark bedroom, then it may turn into the case that if you go into your bedroom without even planning to do it, and then walking into there, you're reminded of pornography, and that's where you start to use. Or it may be that, a silent, you could say like a desk chair, like if you always, masturbated in a desk chair, then that could be your secondary trigger. So think about what some of these secondary triggers are and identify those in your life. Some misleading thoughts. So normally, after you are in a vulnerable environment and you've been exposed to your triggers, so you're in a vulnerable environment, maybe you just drank, and then for your primary and secondary triggers, you just saw somebody on social media, and then you are in your dark room. Then you have a misleading thought that comes after this. What are misleading thoughts? It's something like, I wonder if, let's just see what's out there, or I just want to find out how. So it could be things like, I wonder if there's something leaked about this person, or let's just see what's out there regarding, pictures of somebody or something like that. Or I just want to find out how. So I just want to find out how this thing is done, this sexual thing is done, or sort of like, these are these misleading thoughts that seem like they're benign at first. It's just not, they're not, maybe all that sexual at first, and you sort of feel innocent and curious as you're going down this path, but it always leads you down a bad path. So those are the misleading thoughts. And then it's normally followed by a prefrontal thought. So think again about your prefrontal cortex inhibiting you. This is the smart part, the wise part of your brain that's saying, I said I wouldn't do this again, or my wife is going to kill me if she finds out, or it just won't stop at just searching, or I know that it will go beyond just this. Think about what some of those common thoughts are that you would say to yourself. And then, and then what normally comes after this for people is a sort of free fall thoughts, like I call them. So a free fall thought is something that allows you to get past the prefrontal sort of inhibition. It's something that allows you to fall into the same pattern that you've fallen into before. So something like just this one time, or just a little bit, or just something innocent, or just something like F it. A lot of people I see in all sorts of addictions, for alcohol problems, for heroin, the F it sort of trigger happens where, they've learned all these things, they know all these reasons why they shouldn't use it, but then they developed a very strong power to say F it and just fall down in the same pattern as before. So literally, I call it the free fall thought because it's literally as if you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you start to lean forward and gravity just takes you. You just allow the bad pattern to just take a hold of you and pull you down. So, all right. So now that you've, learned kind of how this works, you have your vulnerable environment. You get exposed to a trigger. That could be a primary trigger like an image you see. It could be a secondary trigger like an environment where you normally use porn. And then you start to use, you start watching something, and then you have these interrupting prefrontal thoughts. So your brain telling you shouldn't do this. And then you have some sort of free fall thought to get past it, like, F it, let's go, or I'm just going to watch one or just one time, or I've already messed up, like I might as well get the most out of it now since I've already made this mistake. And then you fall into using, and normally then, climaxing and then regretting it. So let's begin now by writing your objective. So as we can make a plan for you to feel better, to get past this, start by writing your objective. So you want to be as explicit as possible. What is your desire here? And your desire is usually to not watch pornography ever. So really be, explicit with yourself. Because remember, addicts are highly creative. Addicts can find a way to weasel out of any sort of agreement. They can find a way to, get around whatever sort of contract that they've signed or made with themselves or other people. And that's you, and that's me, and that's whoever's making some sort of contract like this. So you want to say to yourself, instead of saying I will never watch porn, you want to identify for yourself, I will never watch porn or any other video or photo that has, exposed genitalia or something like that. You want to be explicit, because otherwise, as you'll find, if you think that you have a problem with addiction, that you will come up with ways to kind of go around this agreement that you're making with yourself. If you say I won't watch porn, and then you find yourself watching movies that maybe are mature but they're not labeled as pornography, or you would see yourselves looking at some sort of photos or something that are of models or of clothing that aren't necessarily pornographic but that you're still masturbating to or something like that. So you want to be as explicit as possible. Say I do not want to, or I will not watch videos or view images of anybody with their genitals exposed or something like that. So as you write in your objective, write it out like that in a very explicit way. And then follow this with then writing out what your cycle is. So what are your vulnerable physical environments? Remember, idle time is the devil's playground. What are your times that you are most vulnerable to falling into the temptation of pornography or of relapsing? So for you, is it your dark bedroom, laying there with too much time? Is it living by yourself, being in an empty apartment? Is it being drunk or having had a few drinks? What is it that is your vulnerable environment? Write this down. Again, is it late at night? Is it after a nap? Is it after drinking? And then consider, what are your vulnerable times of day, of the week, of the year? Is it at night that you tend to fall into this? Is it on the weekends that you tend to do this? Is it of the year? Is it around certain holidays, times when you have too much time on your hands? So really lay that out. The next question is, what are some other aspects of your vulnerable environments? So are there substances involved? Are you alone? Are you isolated? Are you in the dark, or are you in a bright room? Consider what are some of these other aspects of your environment that makes you vulnerable. Okay, so now we're going to think about how can you recover from this. So how can you attack this problem from the environment perspective? So how can you avoid these environments? So if we know that, for example, for you, a vulnerable environment is when you've had a couple of drinks and you're laying at home late at night on a weekend night, then we can say, this is a vulnerable time for you. So let's think about how we can remove these times. Is there any way that you can spend the night after you drink, maybe sleeping out in your living room as opposed to in your bedroom? Being that it's a more public space, maybe you wouldn't feel comfortable doing that there because your roommates could come by at any time, or a family member, and so that would be an environment that would be less vulnerable for you because you wouldn't feel as free to do it as you would in your private bedroom. Maybe you find that you are, whenever you're just reading alone at home, that this is when you fall into this. Well, should you read at the library? Should you go to the library? Because you probably will not, I hope you would not fall into, viewing pornography and masturbating at the library like you would if you were at home alone reading. Or do you need to stop drinking? So, these are some things to think about. What are some vulnerable environments and how can you change them, or how can you avoid them? And the second thing that I want for you to do is tell your sponsor. So choose a sponsor, choose a friend who also struggles with this, or it could be your spouse, or it could be, a different friend who doesn't struggle with this. Tell them you have this issue with pornography and that these are my vulnerable environments. It's when I'm drinking, it's when I'm home alone, it's after I took a nap in the middle of the day, and tell them. And so then they can keep an eye out for when you're in those vulnerable environments, and they can check in with you. They can say, hey, I know that you were just drinking earlier today, and I know this is a high-risk time for you. Are you okay? All right. So the next thing is to change your environment. So if you've learned, you have this kind of looking more at triggers, but if you have a certain environment that causes this, can you change it around? Can you move apartments, or can you change rooms? Can you even switch around where your bed is located and change how the lighting is? Doing little things like this can make a big difference, so that you don't get triggered in the same way once you've created this new environment. So I want for you to now write out your primary triggers and secondary triggers. So the primary triggers are, maybe accounts that you're following. So who are the people that you're following on what social media channels that they tend to trigger you to use pornography and to masturbate? What are the different social media channels that you're using most often? Is it Instagram? Is it TikTok? Is it going on things like Twitter or Reddit? Ladies out, what are your primary triggers? Your secondary triggers, so what is it? And again, this is kind of similar to your environments, but what are the secondary triggers for you? Is it just laying down and having too much time and like reading on your phone in the middle of the day, or what is a secondary trigger for you? So now I want for us to take action with this. So you need to unfollow the accounts that are your primary triggers. You need to block websites. So you can use apps like BlockerX to block websites that you normally look at from your phone or on your desktop. And then now let's reassociate those secondary triggers. So if if looking at your phone was a secondary trigger, then let's think about how we can reassociate that with something other than porn. So let's think about, looking at your phone in the middle of your room and reading an article on, on the Wall Street Journal or on New York Times, and reading an article in the middle of the day in your room. As long as your sponsor is aware of it and can, keep you from falling back into it, the more that you can expose yourself to using your phone in a non-sexual way over and over, the more comfortable you will get, and your association between your phone and porn will become extinct. It will go away. So let's now think about your misleading thoughts. So what are some of the misleading thoughts that you have when you start to feel curious and you're in this porn-seeking behavior? So is it, I wonder if this model was ever nude, or let's just see if anyone leaked a video, or I just want to find out how to, do different positions or something like that, sort of like educational. So, some of these questions that they feel like, oh, this is just maybe an innocent sort of benign thing that always leads you down the same path. Write those out for yourself. So what is your thought? And what does it always lead to? So is your thought, I wonder if there's a video of this person, and what does that always lead to? Is your thought, I just want to know, X, Y, Z, and what does this always lead to? Or is this thought, let's just see if there's a video of X, Y, Z, what does that always lead to? What you'll realize is that those thoughts always lead to viewing porn, masturbating, and then feeling regret and remorse. But it's important for us to write that out so we know what those thoughts are, so that the next time that we come across those thoughts, we realize that they're silly and pointless and harmful. All right. So the next thing, the guilty action. So this is the single action that we do that goes directly against our objective. So if our objective is, I will never view pornography or any photos or videos that have somebody's exposed genitalia, and you get triggered by seeing a somebody's account on social media, and you click, and you look at the video, or you're just pulling it up, and you have a thought that says, I wonder, well, you have a thought that leads you to that video of, I wonder if there's a video of this person ever nude or something, then your guilty action then is clicking on that and starting to view that video that shows a person's genitalia, because that goes exactly what you said in your objective. So think about that and think, what was your last guilty action? And what is, a guilty action? And it is, to sort of answer that for you, it is when you are, doing exactly the opposite of what it says in your objective. And again, it's important to write that out so that you know what your objective is, and so that you'll be able to identify when you have disobeyed that. Okay. So another thing to think about here is, what are some of your, as you're planning ahead, let's make a plan and think about, what are some of the ways that you can, cut this cycle. So we already thought about, some of the ways that you can avoid the triggers. We talked about defining your objective. We talked about the misleading thoughts and identifying those. So what are some ways that we can make some life changes here? So one of them is restricting access. So as you just saw from your guilty action, even though you promise things to yourself and you promise things to others, it is very likely that you'll fail. In fact, if you're somebody you think you may have an addiction, it is inevitable that you will fail, or that you have failed. And so you cannot trust yourself if you have an addiction. You need to make plans for yourself to just in case yourself were to not follow your objective that you outlined. So what you want to do is restrict access. Restricting access is one of the best ways that you can protect yourself from relapsing. So one of the best ways to restrict access is to use some of these digital tools that can help protect you. So things like a safe search on Google, Covenant Eyes, using things like Blocker X, which is an app for the phone. You can use things like this that can be added to your browser to keep you from going to certain websites. Similarly, there's things you can do on your phone. Again, apps you can use like Blocker X that keep you from going to websites that that you tend to use over and over, whether it's Pornhub, or whether it's just Google, or Reddit, or Twitter, or whatever. You can block those, and then you can also do things like disabling JavaScript or cookies. You can switch your search engine from Google to other ones that make it more difficult to come across illicit or mature content. Similarly, I always recommend that people avoid anonymous search engines like DuckDuckGo or incognito mode, and that's not because I have any problem with those companies. In fact, I think it's a great idea, but unfortunately for people that have addictions or digital addictions, one of the ways that they get around this is by using tools like this that they know are anonymous, so then they feel safer viewing porn or viewing things that are unsafe. And rather, if you feel like your personal information is a little bit exposed, then you're going to be less likely to search for, things that are more concerning. So I advise people to avoid things like DuckDuckGo or incognito mode. And then some people even take more drastic moves and get a dumb phone instead of a smartphone. They get rid of their smartphone. So I would say remove whatever you need to do in order to restrict your access, so you can't even access it, even if you had a weak moment. All right. So similarly, let's think about what are some of the free fall thoughts that you have. Let's write those down so that you can know what your own free fall thoughts are. Is it so again, this is when you're you can feel your mind telling you shouldn't do it. I've promised myself I wouldn't do this, or my spouse would leave me if they find out. What is a free fall statement that you say? Is it it's not really that bad? Is it that a lot of people are worse? Is it it's been a long time since I've done this, or I've already effed up so many times. What's one more time? Just this one time. I'm going to watch just one. I deserve this, or just F it. Consider some of these different ones and write down what are your free fall phrases that you use, and why are they so damaging for you. All right, and then finally, let's talk about those feelings of guilt and remorse. So for people that are experiencing guilt and remorse, after using porn, there's normally a reason why they feel remorseful or guilty about it. It's because they feel like something's wrong about it. So write down, why is your use of pornography bad? Why do you think it's wrong? Is it ethically that you're concerned about how pornography preys on young women and exploits their bodies? Is it, from a religious perspective? Is it because of concerns with your relationships? Or is it, problems with erectile dysfunction, poor sexual performance? What is it that makes you feel regretful about pornography? Why is it bad for you? All right, and after this, let's think about, why do you keep turning to pornography? So let's write down, what is it that normally leads you to turn to pornography? Is it because it comforts you when you're lonely? Is it because you're missing a relationship and you're feeling sort of lonely or sort of lacking sexual stuff in your life? Or is it because you feel like it's something that should be normal for you to have sexual sort of connection from time to time, and that you feel like it's you're feeding sort of your animalistic desire, and part of you tells you that that's a healthy thing to do? Is it a need for physical touch? Why do you keep turning to pornography? All right, now let's think, what are some ways that you can fill your time instead of watching pornography? So this is especially for people that have a problem of having too much time or using pornography when they have free time, and you realize this is a very vulnerable sort of environment for me, having too much time. What are some things that you can do to fill up your time? Is it that you need to spend your time maybe in a library studying, like I had said before, and in a physically, in a location like that where you're not able to masturbate or view pornography? Is it that you need to take on another job? Is it that you could volunteer, fill up your time more? Remember, idle time is a devil's playground. All right. So here are some more strategies. So there are some interrupting activities that you can do if you have a porn problem. And so you can, one of the best ways to change your mentality is to change your body. This is a phrase that Tony Robbins says, to change your psychology, change your physiology. So change what your body is doing in order to change how you're thinking and what you're thinking. So some of these are some very, quick interruptions that you can do. You can, if you're, feeling very tempted, you're kind of milling it over, you can dump your face in cold water. You can take a cold shower. You can go down and do 20 push-ups. You can go for a jog. You can go for a walk in the cold and the rain, maybe, for a short time without a jacket or something like that. You want to kind of make your body do something drastically different than what it's doing right now. That can be a really good kind of reset and really good sort of distraction. Similarly, remember, humans are social creatures. So think about some social things that you can do when you're feeling tempted. You can call your sponsor. You can call a friend, talk to your partner. You can go out to a public space like a local coffee shop, a library, a busy park. If you have a pet, take them out, talk to people. That's a good way to interrupt. Okay. All right. And so another thing to think about here, and this is again sort of this is now a little bit theoretical, but just something that I think about is with addictions. Like I was saying, you get this problem with your prefrontal control over your reptilian brain, and that you're training yourself in addiction to sort of let the prefrontal brain go and just act from the reptilian brain perspective. So consider that the circuitry between the prefrontal cortex and its control over the reptilian brain is weakened in addiction. And so how can you strengthen that prefrontal control? And so there's some actually really good accounts and some literature as well around the role for prefrontal training and the role for essentially increasing discipline and increasing your willful control over your own bodily sort of desires for things like sex and conservation of energy and things like food, and that doing difficult things like training for a marathon or like waking up early and going straight to the gym or like doing some sort of dieting, these are some things that can really build discipline in a way that can help you to regain that control over your reptilian brain. So if that speaks to you, that may be a way for you to get some more control if you feel like you're developing an addiction, is to start waking up early and going directly to the gym, or choose a difficult sort of physical challenge, sign up for it and start training for it. You'll find that as you grow your discipline in one realm, it will help you to grow your discipline also in the realm of your controlling your addiction. All right. And another set of things here, then once you're able to get into remission, you're able to, go a week or a month without using porn, then you can continue using some of these different tools then to stay sober and to stay away from pornography. So again, some of these tools are getting an accountability partner, so having somebody, which you can get that on Blocker X, you can get that on like the NoFap community on Reddit, which is now like 888,000 members strong. Or get an accountability partner in real life and check in with them every week. Tell them if you've been clean, or you can use apps so that they get a report. And then, you could get treatment for your mental illnesses. So you could reach out to a psychiatrist or a therapist or other mental health professionals, and maybe helping with the treatment of your depression or of your ADHD will help, as well as monitoring your porn use can help you to stay sober. You can use different day counters, so there's lots of apps available for this. You can put in there the day that you stopped using pornography, and it can count the number of days that you've been clean, and keeping track of that helps people to stay sober, because they realize, I'm at day 99, and even though I have a lot of urges tonight, I would love to be 100 days clean tomorrow, so I will not use tonight. This can help you to stay clean. And then there are other things that you can use as well. One of them is Extinction Training. So you can place a punishment instead of a reward, or stop rewarding your activity. So whereas before you would have rewarded looking at porn with ejaculation, then now what you can do is replace that reward with a punishment. So there are some apps like Stick, STICKK, and there you can have to pay money to an organization, often an organization that you don't like, if you were to relapse. So you're about to use, you're feeling very, very tempted, and you think, oh man, I'm going to have to give $10 to, this organization I hate, and so I won't use it because of that. That's been found to be very effective. Journaling can help you to keep track of your cravings, your triggers, just like we've talked about before, and doing this on a daily basis will help you to keep closer sort of track of your triggers and kind of what helps you to get over, different cravings you had. And then, like I had mentioned before, just getting busy. So, it may be the case that you need to get another job, that you need a place to volunteer, that you need a new hobby, or need a car or house to fix up. You want to fill up all of your time so that there's no time for porn at all. Okay? And just finally, I want to, mention some common pitfalls. So, people do relapse, and any addiction is a chronic disease. It's relapsing and remitting, which means that you can be porn free for a while, and that doesn't mean that you're out of the woods. Normally a life of sobriety takes a day-by-day effort. So like a lot of people say in the recovery community, they say, one day at a time. Just be sober today. Don't focus on getting sober for life. Don't focus on getting over this, because it's likely that you will never, or at least no time soon, be completely over this. It will be a daily fight for you. So keep that in mind. And as you're, in recovery, think about the fact that a lot of people relapse as they start to what's called doing edging, which means doing things that are very close to the thing that you're not trying to do, but you're really getting very close to it. So one way would be to either watch things that aren't pornographic but are close to it and masturbating to that, or not achieving orgasm. Some people made that their objective. If you're getting very close, be on the lookout for that. Look out for porn substitutes, like I had mentioned before. So things like watching mature things that mature content or nudity that maybe aren't labeled as porn. And then also be on the lookout for fantasizing. So, being too much in your imagination and thinking about things even though you're not consuming pornography, that can become problematic as well. So, all right, I'm beginning to get tired. We've talked about a lot. Porn addiction, in my opinion, is a real problem. It's going to continue to be an even more and more serious problem as more and more young people are raised with this during, a period of unprecedented access to porn. So it is important to be on the lookout, to have a plan. I hope you found this to be very helpful for you, and I'll be sharing some of the images and graphs and other content from this talk so that it can hopefully be helpful for you. If you or a loved one has a problem with porn use, I suggest that you get connected with help. Again, if you ever are in crisis or an emergency, call 911 or go to the ED. In addition, there are so many different tools and tricks that I would suggest, among them being Blocker X, being a really great app for people. So I wish you all the best of luck and have a great day. Keep your brain healthy and be on the lookout for dangerous things like this.